Okay. I guess we can start now. So, sorry, my knowledge of French is very limited. I can pretty much count to 10 and that's it. So we can play a very short hide-and-seek game, but not much more in French. I'll have to do this in English. And kind of the purpose of the talk today is to look at how we can help our organizations really benefit from flexible scope. There's a lot in Agile about planning with flexible scope, doing user stories, flexibility and things like that. And I think for a lot of teams I've worked with, at least as a consultant over the last 10 years or so, that very few of them got really the benefits they expected. So that's what kind of I want to talk to you about today. And my other kind of hidden agenda is to teach you how to mess with Scrum Masters. Kind of, that's my new hobby, is kind of going into organizations and messing with Scrum Masters. So I hope to give you a couple of tricks you can use to completely confuse them. And I'm a coder. I started coding when I was kind of 6, and I've been coding ever since. And somehow I made the jump to kind of this whole Agile thing, and this is the Agile track here, but it's a very technical conference, which is nice. And Agile seems to have kind of grown into two different branches. One branch is how do we do things much more effectively and things like that. And the other one is something like, you know, let's all get naked and dance in the rain. And so I'm not going to speak about the second part. I'm here kind of to hopefully give you some good ideas about the really kind of how do we do things much, much better. And as a coder, I tend to solve problems very technically, and I used to put a lot of value on kind of technical stuff up until 6 years ago or something like that, when I was a CTO of a startup. And we had everything people kind of dream about in terms of the technical stuff. We had fully automated testing, we had continuous deployment, because before that was a buzzword. We had 10 developers who were doing everything, including ops, before DevOps was a buzzword. So we had pretty much kind of no political constraints, no organizational constraints. We could set up the thing to do the way we think is good. And we ran it incredibly well. And we thought we were one of the best teams in the world. We were really happy with everything we're doing, and then the company ran out of money. And after kind of burning £3 million in cash, I kind of had to look myself in the mirror and kind of, as a CTO of the company, say to myself that we're not that good if we could burn through £3 million in cash and not really achieve anything. So that was my wake-up call, and that's hopefully some of the kind of ideas that I've learned while trying to figure out what really happened there are going to inspire you to maybe expand your horizon slightly and help your organizations achieve something much better. And I'll mostly be talking about non-software stuff, because what's really interesting about this problem is not a software problem. This problem is a problem that exists in many other industries and many other fields, and has been solved in many other places pretty well. And by stealing some good solutions from those other places, we can actually help our organizations get the true benefits that they can get from flexible scope and Agile. So one of the really interesting stories I've read recently is from the Ducati racing team in 2003. Ducati is an Italian motorcycle manufacturer, and they started competing in the MotoGP competition. That's kind of the Formula One for motorcycles in 2003. As this was their completely first time, can somebody close the door? Yeah, this was their first year they are competing in this kind of Formula One World Championship for motorcycles. They thought that kind of they don't really know what's going to happen. So they decided to build a bike so that they can change it very quickly. because they knew that they don't know really what they don't know. They don't know what to expect. So they built this motorcycle that was allowing them to kind of pull things in and pull things out and flip things around very quickly. And they also built lots of different sensors into the bike so they can actually figure out what's going on. And something really strange started happening. After every race, they had a debrief with kind of the drivers, they looked at the sensors, they looked at what's going on, and halfway through the season, they started winning. And then kind of in the second part of the season, they were constantly placed in the first 3 places. They finished the whole thing as number 3 overall, which was amazing because nobody expected them to do anything in the first season. And kind of the newspapers all kind of were confused, everybody loved them, this was really big news, they were really enthusiastic about the whole thing, and they decided that next year after that, they're going to go for gold. And they redesigned the bike completely using all the knowledge they had in the first season, and they experienced something that's in software architecture is known as the second system syndrome. The second system syndrome says that the first time you use a new technology, you're going to be very careful not to mess things up. The second time you use a new technology is really dangerous because then you're overconfident. And that's when typically problems happen. So Ducati experienced the second system syndrome where they rebuilt the whole bike using all the knowledge they had. And they took out all the sensors, they took out all the debriefs, they took out everything kind of flexible from that, and they just ran with the same bike the entire second season. They finished far, far worse than anybody expected. And that was a huge wake-up call for them. What they've realized is that they have this fantastic bike. They can change, they can put things in and out, they can restructure it, they can kind of move things around very quickly and learn from that, and they're not using it for that. What they were using it for is kind of, okay, you know, now we've learned everything we need to learn, let's do a completely new bike. And that's where kind of the danger starts. A lot of organizations claim they do agile, but effectively they don't really get any benefits from that. There was a huge research by Forrester Research a couple of years ago, and they interviewed several tens of thousands of companies how they actually do agile. And they concluded that by far the most common way of implementing agile is something they called water, scrum, fall, which is kind of make all the business decisions up front. Then you children can go and play your scrum and, you know, play with that as much as you want, and then kind of we're going to marinate it in staging for a couple of months and then release it once everything comes together. And the problem with that is that's kind of the second Ducati season. You have this brilliant engine that you can, you know, you do DevOps, you do automated testing, you have lots of stuff, you can put things in and out very quickly, but all the decisions were made up front. And that's kind of the real danger. So what the Ducati team learned is that flexibility has a genuine business benefit. When you look at all the other industries apart from software, flexibility is something people buy. Kind of Eurostar, a flexible ticket costs much more than a non-flexible ticket. Where with software, we are the only industry where we have to beg for flexibility. We have to kind of fight with business users very often so that we can do things in a flexible way, which makes no sense at all. So kind of that's one of the most confusing things about the way we do agile, the way most organizations do agile today, according to Forrester, is kind of there's no business demand for such flexibility, and kind of if we do have a capability of running things in 2-week cycles, 1-week cycles, you know, 1-day cycles, whatever, some reasonable cycles, then we're in the position of the Ducati team, where we can actually gain a lot from being flexible, but the business is not really getting the benefits from that. And that's where the big disconnect starts. So kind of the first thing that I think we need to think about as kind of messing with Scrum Masters' heads and messing with product owners' heads is that if the scope that we have isn't flexible, the organization isn't really benefiting from agile at all. The team might be benefiting from kind of better testing or whatever, but the big business benefits are not there. And that's why kind of business people are not going to engage, business people are not going to care, and things like that. Now, the problem with flexible scope is it's much, much easier said than done. That's why kind of so many people on the business side are afraid of that. And I've done a bit of investigation into this. Do you know when the first really agile project, as in kind of, have a good involvement of the product owner, run things flexibly, change things around when the product owner wants to change around, and kind of really good engagement with the business people. When was the first agile project recorded in history? 99? Okay. Not necessarily IT.
Okay. So since the beginning.
Well, I found one in 1628. This 1628 project is a really, really interesting one from the perspective of software delivery, because it was a fantastic kind of government-led project in a very bureaucratic organization where the product owner was the actual product owner. The product owner was the king. In many organizations, product owners are just proxies and kind of business analysts. This guy was the king of the country. He was pretty much involved in day-to-day planning and changes in operations, and this was his baby. And people had to obey. If the king says jump, people jump, especially in 1628, when if the king says heads off, then heads off. So this was a government project done in Sweden. Sweden was at the time an up-and-coming naval power. It was just shaken off. The Danish influences started to emerge as one of the kind of major powers in Europe. And this was a very interesting time, like today, because they had the same thing that people have today. They couldn't kind of really decide whether they wanted an on-premise deployment or a cloud deployment. What they were building was a ship. And by that point, most ships were being built for kind of marine assault, where you'd put lots of people on a ship, then kind of ram into another ship, jump over and kill everybody. The technology was just advancing at this point, so you could put cannons on a ship. So you could do cloud deployments as well, just come closer and kind of deploy from far away. And the king couldn't really decide whether he wanted an on-premise deployment or a cloud deployment. So he was changing the design all the time. More cannon, less cannon, more places for people, less people, and things like that. And then kind of at the end, they built this glorious ship. That was fantastic. It's called the Vasa, and if you ever go to Stockholm, there's a whole museum where it's fantastically well preserved. It's an incredible case study. The reason why it's so well preserved is that when the team was actually able to ship it, and they shipped it on time, on schedule, on budget. When they shipped it, the ship shipped in a literal sense. It started sailing, and about 1.5 kilometers later it turned over and fell into the sea, because there were too many cannons on the deck. So the ship shipped like we ship so many software packages, but it didn't ship very far. And now the real question that I'd like you to think about is kind of the stuff we're doing now, user stories and kind of flexible scope and stuff like that. Does it ship like this? Does it end up in the cold Swedish Sea to be preserved for posterity? Or does it really ship and achieve something big? And this is where kind of a lot of organizations claim, well, we're agile and we do 2-week iterations and we ship and stuff like that. And when you look at what they're shipping to staging. And it goes to production every 6 months or something like that, or never, or things like that. And that's the real danger there. And even if it goes to production, the question is it this kind of shipping or not? And that's kind of the second big problem with flexible scope is flexible scope is horribly dangerous when there's no big picture. When you can allow people to change anything at any time, and people keep playing with kind of pet features and pushing things in and pushing things out, that's horribly, horribly dangerous from a business perspective. Unless there is a clear business picture what you want to achieve. And the way we plan, the way most organizations plan their projects today is broken. because it does not allow us to create this bigger picture. From a big picture perspective, what we count on is that kind of user stories like this are going to provide the big picture because, hey, there's this business benefit there in order to, monitor the inventory stuff. And very often this thing is skipped or kind of invented for the purposes of fitting it into the template or something like that. And even when it's kind of relatively well defined like this, it's still broken. Now, this is the part where you can start playing with Scrum Masters. The reason why this is broken is there's no particular victory condition on this. And because there's no particular victory condition on this, people invent their own victory conditions. We kind of aggregate stuff like this and we put it in kind of, Jira stuff like this. And once there's 500 items here, you actually do have issues. And kind of then we invent victory conditions on, does the acceptance criteria pass? Well, kind of, yeah, we have, all these things are passing and we have some tests that are passing, we have good test coverage. This is what a lot of people love. I used to love this stuff. 6 years ago, I'd push these dials all the way to the top and I'd be very, very proud of that. And this was my key measurement of success. And kind of, because this is not enough data and we still have time and budget to play with stuff, what we tend to do as technical people, we tend to kind of collect brilliant dashboards like this, which are amazing. And we declare victory based on, well, this thing only has 10,078 violations. And, we only have like $300,000 of technical debt. Good. And this stuff is amazing. It's kind of, we spend so much energy, we spend so much time, we spend so much money measuring this stuff. And it's actually completely irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant because all this stuff measures are negative metrics. After my kind of disaster with that startup, I learned that there's basically two types of metrics. There are positive metrics which can show you that something is good, and negative metrics which can show you that something is bad. And all these things are negative metrics. Negative metrics are incredibly good at showing problems, but they're not that good at showing that something actually is achieved. For example, test coverage is an incredibly good negative metric. Very low test coverage probably tells you have problems with testing. A very high test coverage doesn't tell you anything. I've seen too many organizations as a consultant where people just kind of write tests without expectations or write bad tests to increase test coverage because the build system requires 85% test coverage or something like that. Kind of bug trends and stuff like that, they're all negative metrics as well. A very high number of bugs is probably telling you that something's wrong. A very low number of bugs doesn't tell you anything. Maybe the system wasn't tested, maybe it was tested by wrong people, maybe it was skipped, maybe kind of a ton of other things. So it doesn't really tell you anything good about this. And kind of a nice way to think about this is blood pressure is an interesting negative metric of human health. So a very high blood pressure is a good sign that something's wrong. A very low blood pressure is a good sign that something's wrong. A normal blood pressure is not a sign of anything. There could be 5 million other things wrong with me if I have normal blood pressure. So, and kind of, if you have a high blood pressure, probably the fastest way of reducing blood pressure is to kind of cut your head off. That's not going to make you healthier. And kind of a lot of Scrum Masters end up doing that with their teams. They optimize a negative metric. And by optimizing a negative metric, they strangle a team, they cut the head off, and they're not making the team any healthier. And a particular negative metric that Scrum Masters like to optimize are story points and velocity. I hate this. I hate this with all the anger I can hate it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to teach you how to mess with Scrum Masters' heads when they talk about velocity. Scrum in particular is kind of insistent on this stuff. There's every Scrum team I've seen like has these big burn up charts, big burn down charts. Velocity is the primary achievement in Scrum. This is a picture from rapidscrum.com, which is kind of talking about several important case studies of rapid Scrum adoption, where people were made hyper-productive. This is a graph that talks about the company that was made 400% hyper-productive over 8 months. I typically show this to new managers when I work with them and say, look, Scrum can make your team 400% hyper-productive in 8 months. Do you want to do that? I've never had anybody say no. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants to be like that. So let's look at velocity in a bit more detail. Let's say that, one thing I really love about France is France has these place names that for English people, I live in England now, so I can identify with most of the jokes they kind of tell. France has these incredible place names that for English people sound completely politically incorrect. So they like to use them. For example, there's a village called Poussy in France, which is, for French people completely normal. For English people, that's a place where you go and take a picture if you're in France. There's another place called Brest, so let's use Brest. So, so let's say that we're in Paris and we want to go to Brest. For some insane reason, I decide to drive. And Google tells me that if I want to drive from Paris to Brest, the expected journey is 591 kilometers, 5 hours 31 because there's some roadworks and stuff like that. If I want to achieve that plan, I need to move at average at 105 kilometers an hour. Now, imagine this thing. After a while, we are actually in Brest. And our average velocity was not 105 kilometers an hour, our average velocity was 110. Is this success or failure? Who argues for success? Couple of people. Okay, why is it a success? Velocity is more, okay. And we're in Brest. We're in Brest, velocity is more. Two things that are very, very important. Yeah? So let's add a bit more information. So it took us 7 hours 55 to get there. Is this good or bad? It's bad. Why is it bad? Is that bad? I mean, we are agile, we can replan, yeah, right? So maybe there's some business value in going there. So good, bad. You, my friend, said it was good. So do you feel it's good or bad now with this piece of information? Not very good. Let's add one more piece of information. So we crossed 859 kilometers to get to Brest. This doesn't look that good anymore, does it? So just by looking at velocity, we can't really tell much. That's kind of the key point. And when the velocity is a really great negative metric. If you're running at 5 kilometers an hour, you pretty much know that something's wrong. You know that the road is blocked, the engine doesn't work, something's wrong. When you're running at 105 or 110 kilometers an hour, that's not giving you enough information to conclude that you've done anything good. So does anybody know what's wrong with this? No, we went directly to Brest, but we went to Brest in Germany. We're agile, we replanned, we couldn't give you this Brest, we gave you that Brest. So, it's the same thing, I mean, come on. So, that's the real problem with looking at velocity as the only metric of success. The big danger is you end up in a completely wrong Brest. And this is not the worst. There's Brest in Belarus, it's kind of 1,500 kilometers away. So the big problem here is the 400% hyper-productive thing. And this is the really, really interesting part where you can mess with Scrum Masters. The 400% hyper-productive diagram is MySpace in 2009. If you read the text on that page, it's hidden because MySpace is a uniquely relevant product now. In 2009, it was more popular than Facebook. And I showed, diagram to Scrum Masters and product owners and said, do you want to make the team 400% hyper-productive? Yes! Do you want to be like MySpace in 2009? Probably not a good idea. You end up in a completely wrong breast. So that's the thing with the whole kind of victory conditions we set. If we set victory conditions with negative metrics, and if we optimize negative metrics, we're in the danger of ending up in a completely wrong place. And as technical people, I think it has to be our job to actually help people understand this, because it's not going to happen otherwise. We as software professionals have to start engaging people much better and pointing out at these problems. And that's why a lot of organizations end up doing water scrum fall and end in Belarus instead of ending in where they want to end. So the problem with this stuff is plans often do not turn out the way we expect. And again, this is not a particular problem related to software. This is a problem that's been around in lots of other industries, in lots of other places. There's a fantastic book about that called Adapt by Tim Hartford. Tim Hartford is an economist, and he's writing about how linear planning almost never works. How linear planning almost never works in economy, in social sciences, in civil engineering, in military, in politics, in anywhere, linear planning doesn't really work. And the big danger with water scrum fall, the big danger with not having flexible scope is we end up with a linear plan. Tim Hartford writes in the book about a really interesting Russian engineer named Peter Palchinsky, who invented the lean startup about 100 years ago. It's a really interesting thing, not in software, but in civil engineering. And he was looking at linear planning and how linear plans never work, and he identified 3 interesting dimensions that are unplannable for. You can't really predict them. One interesting dimension Palchinsky identified is time, especially in technology. As we start rolling things out, competitors do stuff, the industry moves. 5 years ago, social and mobile were not that important. Social and mobile are almost everything now. Everybody does social and mobile stuff. Even big enterprises want to have something to do with social and mobile. And even on shorter term, time tends to create interesting problems. I'm building a collaboration tool now, and one of our key business assumptions was that we're going to offer the free version for a single user, and if you wanted to collaborate in real time, you will have to pay. That's how we're going to make money. Halfway through building the collaboration module, Google released Google Drive real-time for free, which meant that anybody in the world can pretty much have real-time collaboration on Google's infrastructure. It's going to be better than what we can do. And it doesn't cost them anything. So as a application provider, you can just integrate with that and give people real-time collaboration capability. This pretty much invalidated our business plan. And time-based dimensions like that are unplannable because they don't depend on us. They depend on the market, they depend on the competition, they depend on everybody else. We can't plan for what everybody else is going to do. So one really interesting example of that in real life that I found recently was on eBay. There was a Tupolev bomber appearing on sale on eBay for $3 million in cash, and you had to pick it up really quickly from Ukraine. There was an interesting time-based dimension to this dynamic where the original owners are coming to pick it up. And so it created an interesting business opportunity or a danger for the people that actually own this thing. So things like this happen in real life, things like this happen in software. You think something is going to happen, something different happens, or somebody else causes problems for you that you need to act on very quickly. And if at this point you are able to replan, if at this point you are able to be agile, in the first agile sense, not running around naked and drinking, and so if at that point you are able to be agile, then your business can get a lot of benefits from it. If you're in a water scrum fall situation, you end up delivering features that are completely obsolete. So the second dimension Palczynski talks about is humans. Humans are unpredictable. We think we can kind of control people. We think if we do this, they will do that. But people have their own minds. People have their own ideas. They have their own incentives. They might or might not want to do what we want them to do. A really interesting case study of that is IBM PC Junior. IBM PC Junior is a $2 billion disaster, completely driven by customer research. They did lots of focus groups, they did lots of research, they got kind of customers to tell them what they really, really want. Then they built that thing and nobody wanted to buy it. And Anthony Ulrich, who was the head of that project, wrote a book called What Customers Want, in which he explains kind of the whole problem of people telling you what they want, not really wanting that, and kind of you think something's going to happen, something else happens, and things like that. And this is kind of, I see this in software all the time, where people think, well, you know, we're just going to do this, and then Google PageRank is going to jump like this, and it doesn't. But we still keep doing that stuff. Or we're just going to do this, and people will buy a lot more from us, and kind of they don't. Now, kind of, again, this is not just a problem in software, this is a problem in real life. People find ways to work around constraints. People find ways of doing other stuff. A really interesting case study of that in real life is a place called Saarbrücken. Saarbrücken is a fantastic case study in linear planning and a fantastic case study in how government plans fail when they're opposed to people's incentives. Saarbrücken is, if you can see this is the French-German border. Saarbrücken is about 250 meters from the French-German border. And the reason why Saarbrücken is interesting at the moment is Saarbrücken is now the hottest place for building in Germany, and there's lots of new buildings coming up now because the French government decided to tighten the laws on prostitution. And somebody saw a business opportunity. There's a €5 million mega brothel being built by Germans in Saarbrücken because there's a lot of demand on the other side of the border and the laws are being tightened. So this is kind of, I've seen this lots and lots of times with kind of really interesting software plans where people do something and the business effect is completely the opposite. They actually end up losing money, they actually end up kind of losing customers, but they don't replan. They keep doing what they decided to do. And kind of, if at this point you can be flexible, if at this point you can restructure stuff and kind of provide this agility to the organization, this is fantastically good. If not, in water scrum fall, then the organization isn't really getting any benefits from agile. And the third dimension that's really interesting that Palczynski talks about is local stuff. Kind of, Palczynski says that you can't really predict how things are going to play out in different localities. For example, one of our customers was a financial company, and they started rolling out some credit products to people in Northern Europe. And they were using some algorithms, they made quite a lot of money on that, they decided to expand. And they decided to expand to Russia by using the same risk algorithms, and lost quite a lot of money in the first couple of months because kind of people's idea of paying for what they bought when somebody gives them credit in Russia is completely different than in kind of Norway. So local stuff is kind of, again, something that changes quite a lot. And this is where in software, for example, really unpredictable things happen with locality. This collaboration product I'm building now, a couple of months ago, we started getting a ton of JavaScript errors from Spain. There's no particular locality stuff. We actually, the only language is English you can use for now. And because we measure client-side JavaScript errors, we started seeing a huge spike in client-side JavaScript errors on Google Analytics, and most of them were coming from Spain. This is kind of insane. And then kind of a couple of people from Spain started complaining and sending us screenshots. And the screenshots were in Spanish. So Chrome, unknown to me, has a feature where it can automatically translate web pages. And because we were using the button labels to kind of identify functions we need to call, some Spanish translation got in a weird Unicode character that completely broke everything. That's, if I had all the knowledge in this word, I couldn't predict that. Somebody there using Google's translation function to break my JavaScript code, now I know that. But that's kind of something that we can't really plan for. That's what Palczynski says. So there's three dimensions that Palczynski talks about as unplannable for. There's no plan that can satisfy this stuff because they don't depend on us, they depend on other people. And Palczynski's idea was, well, we can create plans that are flexible in these dimensions so that once unpredictable things happen, and they will, we can react to them quickly. And we can take this even a step further. Why just react to this stuff? Why just kind of survive? Why not turn this thing into a competitive advantage? For example, kind of when Google released Google Drive Real-Time, we were flexible enough to say, well, if anybody can offer this for free, let's drop our business plan, let's offer this for free as a competitive advantage and do something else to earn money. And most of the reviews of the tool are, oh, it's amazing how it's completely free to collaborate. So we were, if anybody can disrupt us, we can disrupt ourselves. We can be faster than the competition. We can turn this flexible planning thing into a competitive advantage, and the organization can really benefit from that. We are like the Ducati team that has measurements. We can put a completely new wheel on the bike and win the next race. That's the benefit of agile. That's the benefit of flexible scope. So, this is where things get really, really interesting, because going back to kind of playing with Scrum Masters, this is what we used to plan. With lots of organizations, this is what they used to plan. As a sales manager, in order to kind of blah, 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 I want blah, 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 and then we create hundreds of these things, we kind of put them in Jira, but the problem with this thing is real planning doesn't happen on this thing. This is completely disconnected from real planning. Go to the top business people, and real planning is always done in PowerPoint. Real planning is kind of something like this. This is the Adobe Cold Fusion roadmap. Because this is being recorded, I'm obliged to say that I think it's fair use to use this because I will criticize it. And kind of it's a roadmap, you can see the URL, it's called blah, blah, blah roadmap PDF. This is what most organizations that I work with have as roadmaps. A PowerPoint that says Q1 this, Q2 this, Q3 this, and because this is kind of today, well, of course, there's mobile in the first one, there's mobile in the second one, there's cloud, there's social. That's what kind of people do with roadmaps. This is completely disconnected from this stuff. There's no big picture, there's no connection between those things, and when there's no big picture, we are in danger of shipping things like the Vasa ship, where it goes out but actually kind of, explodes immediately. So kind of the big danger with this thing is actually this is not a roadmap. In the Palczynski planning sense, this is a road. It's a linear way of doing things. This is a road. It's a linear way of doing things. It's not a roadmap. Kind of, this is a roadmap. The trick is in the name. It's a map of roads. If I want to go from here to there, well, there's, lots of bridges. I'm still confused why the oldest one is called the new one, but hey, this is Paris. So, but there's lots of options there. If there are demonstrations on one of them, if there's some kind of a strike which tends to be popular in Paris, I can cross another one. I don't have to plan for everything up front. I can have lots of options. I can explore options. If one of those bridges is open, I can kind of replan and I can take that bridge instead of my originally planned one. I have lots of options. Now, this is the really interesting part. This thing here is not a roadmap. It's a road going through a tunnel. We get in on one end, we get out on the other end, and at that point we figure out that we are in a completely wrong breast. And we need to start planning much more with roadmaps like this, and kind of that's the real trick. So planning with roadmaps like this is a challenge on its own, because kind of 10 years ago when we used to plan with roadmaps like this. We'd kind of start over there, we'd want to end up over there. I don't drive, my wife drives, I've never learned how to drive. My role is mostly kind of was to keep the map open and try to not get lost. And then over the next kind of 2 hours, we argue who is an idiot that doesn't know how to drive, who is an idiot that doesn't know how to read the map. And then when we get completely lost, we have to get out, we have to cool down, replan the whole thing, start over again. Now, 10 years ago, we bought kind of a GPS, which is enabled us to kind of save our marriage. We no longer have to argue. Nobody needs to be an idiot. Nobody needs to kind of be a moron, because if somebody takes a wrong turn, GPS replans automatically. If a road is blocked, I just say, Tom, find me another road, and it replans automatically. And the big problem with flexible scope in Agile is we do not have something like this. So my challenge to you today is try and help your organization create this for your plans. Because if we have a GPS, then we can use roadmaps like this very easily. We have lots of options, we can replan flexibly, we can benefit from this stuff. And unless we have that, kind of flexible scope becomes really dangerous, because there's too many options to track, we can't manage it, we don't have a big picture. There's a couple of really interesting things that make a GPS valuable. There's 40 kilometers an hour thing, that's velocity, we know that. We know how to track that. But there are two more pieces of information which make a GPS really useful. There's this stuff here. That's kind of how far is the next turn and what does the next turn look like. So we can know whether we've made the next turn or not instantly. And kind of this part here that says, well, we're this far from the destination and our expected time to get there is kind of this. And if we can create these two things for our organizations, we can get them to actually turn flexible scope into a competitive advantage. And now the real question is, how do we go about doing that? And if we go back to kind of this stuff, Palczynski identified 3 important principles for plans that have flexible scope. He said the first important principle is to do variation. To kind of do variation in terms of seeking out new ideas and trying out different things. And this is where kind of linear plans with user stories fail horribly. Because we do not approach user stories as lots of different options, we approach user stories as commitment. This is what somebody decided we're going to do, we're going to go and do that. And it's in Jira, so it must be done. So this kind of overlaps a bit with the other thing, and Palczynski said the second big principle here is survivability, and kind of that things should be done on a scale where failure is survivable. We shouldn't bet the whole company. We shouldn't plan for 9 months up front and then create a cold fusion roadmap. By the way, has anybody been developing websites in late 90s? There's a couple of people there. Do you remember Cold Fusion in the late 90s? Cold Fusion was the platform at the time. Cold Fusion was the best thing, the kind of the stuff that the alpha geeks used to build websites. Cold Fusion today is an incredibly kind of irrelevant product. Now, think about the way they do roadmaps and think about whether your product needs to be the same. And kind of this is where we end up in a really, really interesting situation with kind of we need to do these experiments on a scale where failure is survivable. And the third principle that Palczynski said is we need to be kind of selecting stuff. We need to apply selection in a sense that things that worked we keep, things that didn't work we throw away. And this is the part we are really bad at in software. Very, very, very rarely do things get removed. Once it's in, it's in. It's tested, we have automated tests, it's there, we keep the feature. One of the best teams I worked with had a completely insane process I didn't understand at first. What they used to do is, with every user story, they would get a couple of key business metrics. And they would do something about that user story very quickly and roll it out to 10% of their users. Then they would measure whether the metrics are changing in the right direction or not. If not, they would throw away the code. It doesn't matter if all the tests are passing, it doesn't matter if all the acceptance tests have passed, it doesn't matter if the usability testing is okay, the code failed. it didn't achieve the big picture that they wanted to achieve, and there's no reason to keep it in. That's the way to kind of kill technical debt immediately. And kind of, this is where user stories can be incredibly good, but they're actually not. The way we collect user stories, the way we capture them, is not allowing us to do this stuff. Because all we have are negative metrics. So this is the next part about playing with Scrum Masters. So kind of, when we talk about Palczynski's principles, we think about variation is, well, we need to plan to learn. We need to start approaching this thing as, unexpected things will happen. Everybody knows that unexpected things will happen. So why not kind of create a plan so we can learn? And then the question is, are we kind of creating user stories that allow us to learn or not? And there's a huge movement in business management now called design thinking, which talks about several different phases in rolling products out. And one of the phases is kind of divergent thinking, where we need to create lots of options, and then convergent thinking, where we need to select from these options. And they talk about analysis happening in between. For most software projects, this is not the role of analysis. Tim Brown, who wrote the book on design thinking, says that the point of analysis is pointless if you have only one option, because you've already chosen what you want to do. The purpose of analysis should be to kind of choose between several different options. And the user stories that we create now are not positioned to allow us to create options. Analysis we do on user stories is not about which of these 5 options is better. It's, well, what does my product owner think about this? Who cares? So, kind of, user stories shouldn't be commitment. User stories should be options. User stories should be kind of lots of options we plan. User stories should be kind of the landscape on the roadmap. This is how we can get the benefits from flexible scope. We need to start changing the perception of user stories in our organizations to do this. The second kind of Palczynski's principle is selection, and this is the one we're doing really, really badly in software at the moment. And I think we need to plan for discarding mistakes. If we know that we're going to learn through delivery, we need to start planning for discarding mistakes. And the question is, how do we actually choose what's a mistake? So if you go back to this format of a user story, it's not that good at telling us whether we're in the right place or not. All the metrics that people associate with this aren't really success metrics. They're all negative metrics. And here's a really interesting trick that you can do to mess with Scrum Master and product owners' heads. You can spend 10 more minutes on this user story and make it 5 million times more useful. And the trick here is that we need to assign a victory condition on this. That's kind of a higher picture victory condition on this. And there's a lot of research in human resource management and stuff like that, and kind of Anton Ulrich's conclusion as well from what customers want is that we shouldn't be planning to achieve what customers want. We should be planning to create a change in somebody's behavior, a change in somebody's way of working, and then measuring whether we are achieving that change. The big problem with this thing is this person was able to monitor inventory before we did the user story. They can go and look at the boxes, they can look at the legacy system, they can look at other stuff. This person will be able to monitor the inventory after this story is done. There's no change here, there's no victory condition, so then we need to invent our own stuff. Now the question is, we need to change this part here. And this is what I've started doing a couple of years ago, and it works like magic. Every time somebody comes up with this, that's describing a behavior, ask them a very simple question. What's the change in that behavior? How differently will somebody be able to monitor the inventory after this user story is done? Now, faster is an option, more accurate is an option, cheaper is an option, lots of other things there, but as soon as you start thinking about a change becomes observable. We can put some business metrics on this. Well, how much faster is faster? And this is where we can start doing selection. If I do this user story, is it making people monitor the inventory faster or not? If not, does it matter that all the acceptance tests have passed? So, That's kind of a really interesting mind shift in this whole thing, and makes user stories much, much more effective. And kind of the second point of kind of the Polchinski stuff is that user stories should really be about behavior changes, not about behaviors. As soon as we start describing behavior changes, we can start looking at selection. The really interesting thing here is, imagine you have 20 user stories about making somebody monitor inventory faster. And they all need to make their monitored inventory faster 10% more. Imagine the first user story does 10%. There's some unexpected human thing there, or time-based thing that, now, is it really worth delivering the other 19 user stories? Or are they just waste? Are we better off replanning and doing something more? And this is where kind of the third Polchinski's principle come in, and kind of we need to do these things on a survivable scale. We need to do these experiments so that if they work out really great, we can stop. If they don't work out, we can stop. It's not doing this. We need to start doing something else. We're going in a different direction. And kind of this is where user stories can be fantastically good, but they're not. And this is where kind of we need to start creating this bigger picture thing. We need to start visualizing that these 10 user stories are all about making somebody monitor inventory 10% faster. These 500 user stories are all about getting customers to buy more. And kind of we need to start raising the level of discussion so we can prioritize on that level. So any kind of tasks and stuff like that, that's all too little, that's all broken down too much. We need to start looking at the impacts on our customers and kind of the business goals on the top of this, and engaging people in a much more useful discussion on that level there. We need to start helping people prioritize on this level there, and not having the top thing in PowerPoint and having the bottom thing in Jira. We need to start connecting this stuff somehow. And this is where kind of user stories are incredibly well as kind of this part here. But kind of user stories, we argue for user stories to be small because they can be done in an iteration. That's pointless. Business people don't care about that. User stories need to be small because we need to survive if they were a bad idea. User stories are there so that business people can buy a flexible ticket and decide that this trip is not worth doing. So great user stories are kind of survivable experiments. And we need to create a bigger picture thing between them. So that's kind of, those are some ideas that I wanted to talk to you about. And if we can start creating kind of this higher level business picture, if we can start managing scope that is about survivable experiments, then we can use user stories as the next turn on our GPS. Did we make this turn or not? If we can look at the bigger picture, then we can see, is this going the right direction or not? Are we going to the right place, or are we going completely in the wrong place? And our organizations can benefit from agile. So that's kind of the message for today. I hope I've challenged your thinking at least a bit. I'm overrun on time, but I'll be outside if you want to chat about this. Thank you very much.